glitter coming from Steven right now. It's crazy.
Well, Rachel, that's dandruff.
It started with a whisper, a private call, a quiet warning, and a studio too proud or too desperate to listen. What followed wasn't just a box office flop. It was a cinematic implosion that torched legacies, stalled franchises, and left one rising star at the center of a media storm. But before the memes, the backlash, the damage control, there was a voice, a legendary one. Steven Spielberg didn't just try to warn Disney. He practically begged them. It began the way these stories rarely do, with a phone call that should have changed everything. Not a press leak, not a PR move, just one of Hollywood's most respected directors dialing directly into Disney's upper ranks. No assistants, no lawyers, no middlemen, just Steven Spielberg, calling with urgency in his voice and a warning too sharp to ignore. Insiders say it happened sometime in late 2023. Spielberg had just wrapped a grueling round of reshoots for West Side Story, and while the film was quietly racking up praise, something behind the scenes had left a bitter taste. That something had a name, Rachel Zegler. This wasn't idle gossip. This wasn't a rumor passed around by hairdressers and lighting techs. This was Spielberg himself, man of E.T., Jaws, Schindler's List, taking time out of post-production to call the most powerful studio on Earth and say, in no uncertain terms, she's trouble. Be careful. He didn't rant. He didn't speculate. He warned, and he meant it. According to one source familiar with the call, Spielberg didn't just share a few frustrations. He laid it all out. The tantrums, the on-set walkouts, the late-night script rewrites Zegler demanded without approval, the way seasoned industry pros, some with decades of experience, were being treated like interns in their own house. Worse than the behavior, he said, was the pattern. She wasn't learning from it. She wasn't adapting. She was escalating. He called it early. He saw it clearly. Zegler wasn't just a challenging actress. She was, in Spielberg's words, a PR minefield waiting to detonate. But here's where the story takes its first sharp turn. Because instead of treating the call like a fire alarm, Disney treated it like background noise. Maybe they thought Spielberg was being overprotective of his film. Maybe they believed a young, outspoken actress was just what their live-action strategy needed. Or maybe they were so dazzled by Zegler's rising social media star power that they couldn't hear the sirens over the follower count, so they noted the call, filed it, and moved forward. They didn't just ignore Spielberg. They greenlit the fuse. The first red flag didn't wave. It snapped in the wind. According to members of the West Side Story crew, the early days of filming were filled with hope. Zegler was fresh off a viral casting announcement, and Spielberg had publicly praised her as a once-in-a-generation talent. The buzz was real. The cameras were rolling. But behind the lens, the cracks began to form almost immediately. At first, it was small things. Missed cues, disagreements about choreography, unusual tension with the costume team. But it escalated quickly. Crew members say Zegler grew increasingly demanding, often rewriting her own lines and refusing choreography she didn't like. Some days she disappeared between takes, allegedly walking off set when things didn't go her way. This wasn't diva behavior in the classic Hollywood sense. It was something more volatile. One lighting tech said it felt like walking on eggshells around a storm cloud. A script supervisor reportedly referred to her as a one-woman HR hazard, and a veteran assistant director who'd worked with everyone from Meryl Streep to Daniel Day-Lewis was overheard muttering, "She acts like this movie is about her and only her." For Spielberg, it was more than frustrating. It was disheartening. He had fought for Zegler, believed in her. She wasn't just cast, she was championed, and that made the unraveling even harder to watch. Every reshoot became a negotiation. Every scene had the potential to stall. Some days, the energy on set was so tense you could feel it in the air, like static before a lightning strike. And still, Spielberg kept trying, offering notes, adapting schedules, even rewriting around the disruptions to keep things moving. But eventually, something in him shifted. It wasn't just a bad experience anymore. It was a warning sign. Because if he, a director known for bringing out the best in his actors, couldn't keep her on track, what chance did Disney have with a $250 million tentpole riding on her shoulders? That's when he made the call. And the most shocking part? He spelled it all out, not in vague terms, not in industry platitudes. He told them plainly, Zegler's behavior was not a one-off. It was a pattern, one that could burn through production timelines, budgets, and eventually, Disney's own brand. His final note reportedly wasn't dramatic. It was cold, direct. If you cast her, you're not just hiring a lead, you're inheriting a problem. But as we already know, the mouse didn't listen. So why did Disney ignore one of Hollywood's most respected voices? Why gamble everything on an unproven lead when a legend was sounding the alarm? The answer says as much about modern Hollywood as it does about corporate hubris. Disney's boardrooms were buzzing with pressure. The studio's live-action remakes had become billion-dollar juggernauts, each new announcement hyped as the next big thing. But after a few high-profile misfires, the shine was wearing thin. They needed a win, something bold, something now. Rachel Zegler fit the bill, at least on paper. She was young, outspoken, trending on every platform, and carried just enough edge to sell a reboot as relevant. Executives believed her rising social media star power would offset any rumors of behind-the-scenes turbulence. A little controversy? Maybe even good for business. Viral moments meant free publicity. And then there was the optimism, the stubborn belief that Disney could manage anyone. After all, they were the House of Mouse, with a reputation for turning rough stones into dazzling jewels. If Spielberg struggled with Zegler, maybe he just wasn't using the right tools. Maybe she just needed a little Disney magic. So the studio ran the numbers, consulted the PR teams, and convinced themselves Spielberg was being too cautious, maybe even a bit out of touch. Times had changed. Audiences wanted something edgier. A bit of rebellion, they thought, was exactly what a legacy character like Snow White needed. They wrote down Spielberg's warning. They filed it away in the corporate version of a junk drawer. And then, in a moment that would haunt the studio for years, they doubled down. Zegler wasn't just cast. She was announced as the new face of a billion-dollar legacy. The message was clear. Ego beat experience. Buzz won over wisdom. What they couldn't see, what they wouldn't see, was that their big swing was about to turn into the biggest misfire in Disney's modern history. And the fuse was already lit. The first signs that things were going sideways didn't come with headlines. They came with invoices. Production on Snow White was already ambitious, but as the months wore on, that ambition began to look more like chaos. What was initially a modest, calculated remake of a beloved classic soon spiraled into a runaway beast with a budget that ballooned past $250 million, a figure that made even seasoned Disney insiders nervous. Behind the scenes, red flags multiplied. Scripts were rewritten again and again, trying to strike a tone that felt modern without alienating the old fanbase. Zegler reportedly insisted on more musical numbers, some of which were added so late they were still being edited weeks before the marketing rollout. Each new decision seemed to pull the film further from its fairy tale roots and closer to something unrecognizable, and the tone all over the place. Critics at early screenings described it as confused, cowardly, and ideologically overcooked. One source said it felt like a movie that didn't know whether it wanted to inspire or lecture. Then came the tech problems. VFX delays, scheduling conflicts, reshoots layered over reshoots. And through it all, the studio kept hemorrhaging cash. CGI dwarfs? Expensive. New choreography sequences? Also expensive. Zegler's growing influence on the creative direction? Very expensive. Meanwhile, Disney's internal forecasting team started whispering uncomfortable truths. Test audiences weren't responding well. The empowered princess messaging wasn't landing. And worse, early reactions online weren't just neutral, they were hostile. But rather than pull back, Disney pushed forward, hard. They rolled out teaser trailers packed with reimagined dialogue, grand visuals, and empowerment sound bites. They dressed it in gold and told investors it would shine. On paper, Snow White was still a crown jewel. They banked on the brand name, they bet on the message, and above all, they bet on Rachel Zegler. This wasn't just a movie anymore. It was a cultural statement, a stake in the ground, a line in the sand. But they forgot something. Sometimes the audience doesn't want a reinvention. Sometimes they just want the story they love. If Disney's boardroom thought their biggest challenge was budget overruns, they clearly hadn't met the internet, because the moment marketing began, the internet started digging, and it didn't have to dig very far. Clips from old interviews, sound bites from convention panels, casual comments that were never meant to carry weight suddenly resurfaced with the power of wrecking balls. And at the center of all of them, Rachel Zegler. In one now infamous video, Zegler confidently calls the original Snow White super dated. In another, she waves off the romantic storyline entirely, asking sarcastically, "Who wants a movie about true love?" And the audience? Oh, they were listening. TikTok, Twitter, Instagram, it didn't matter. The clips went viral, not because people were outraged, but because they were mocking. Memes started to snowball. Reactions piled up. Fans, real ones, who had grown up on Disney magic, took offense not just to Zegler's tone, but to the dismissiveness. It wasn't critique. It felt like contempt. Then came the hashtag, Not My Snow White. It started as a whisper, a few disillusioned fans venting in comment sections. But within days, it was trending globally. TikTok edits played side-by-side comparisons. Classic Snow White scenes on one side, Zegler's smirking soundbites on the other, dripping with disdain. It wasn't just Gen Z or millennials. This backlash spanned generations. Mothers, daughters, grandmothers, even former Disney employees chimed in, reposting edits with captions like, "Walt is rolling in his grave." The internet remembered everything. And the irony? This wasn't fueled by right-wing rage bait or trolls in their basements. These were Disney loyalists, the very people the remake was supposed to enchant. Worse still, every attempt by the studio to course-correct, more trailers, soft-focus interviews, legacy-themed posters, felt hollow, like putting a glittery Band-Aid on a deep gushing wound. Disney tried to steer the narrative back, but the algorithm had already chosen its villain, and it wasn't the evil queen, it was their leading lady. If the backlash had been simmering, one word turned it into a wildfire: stalker. It came from a buried clip, a panel interview from years earlier, long forgotten, until the internet unearthed it like a cursed relic. Zegler, lounging in a press chair with casual confidence, crosses her arms and says with a smirk, the original prince literally stalks her. And just like that, the internet detonated. TikTok went into overdrive. Memes, stitches, remixes, it was digital carnage. One edit showed the animated prince serenading Snow White beneath her balcony, only to cut immediately to Ziegler's stalker remark, slowed down and dripping in horror music. Another cut between classic Disney kisses and sarcastic captions like, "And here we have Disney's first animated predator." It wasn't just funny, it was brutal. Even users who hadn't planned to watch the film suddenly had an opinion, and that opinion was loud. The tone shifted from mockery to rejection. This wasn't just about a creative direction anymore. This was about trust, about nostalgia, about whether a multi-billion-dollar company had forgotten what made their stories timeless in the first place. And Disney? They were in free fall. Marketing teams scrambled to suppress the backlash. New trailers were cut overnight, suspiciously devoid of any controversial dialogue. Social media teams were instructed to limit comments. Executives hoped the storm would pass. Spoiler alert, it didn't, because just when they thought it couldn't get worse, it did. Jonah Platt, son of the film's producer Mark Platt, an industry insider and Broadway veteran, posted a single, venom-laced Instagram story. Your lead just kneecapped the rollout. Congrats. No hashtags, no context, just a sniper shot through the heart of Disney's image. Suddenly, it wasn't just angry fans anymore. It was insiders, people behind the curtain. The message was deafening. This wasn't a troll-fueled pile-on. This was a revolt. And the face of it all? Zegler, once hailed as Hollywood's next great leading lady, was now seen as the actress who mocked the magic, undermined the myth, and torched the kingdom, all with a smirk. The memes had stopped being jokes. They were becoming eulogies. The memes were bad. The trending hashtags were worse. But what truly shook Disney to its core wasn't the noise outside. It was the silence inside. Behind closed doors, executives were panicking. The kind of panic that doesn't show up in press releases, but you could see it in the rushed emergency meetings, the frantic late-night calls, the sudden quiet cancellation of press events that had been scheduled for months. Because for the first time in recent memory, Disney wasn't steering the conversation. They were drowning in it. Shareholders began to get cold feet. Sentiment analysis reports showed plummeting favorability for Snow White, not just the film, but the brand. Investors started asking hard questions. Why was this actress allowed to say that? Who approved this message? And where was the oversight? Inside the studio, whispers turned into arguments. The marketing department blamed casting. Casting blamed PR. PR blamed the directors. No one could agree on who had lit the match, but everyone was now covered in ash. Then came the leaks. Emails, DMs, off-the-record quotes. One Disney insider reportedly told Variety, "It was like watching someone burn your house down and still being told to smile for the family photo." Even veteran creatives, normally tight-lipped about internal drama, began venting anonymously. Producers who had supported Zegler quietly began distancing themselves. Others flat out admitted, "We should have listened to Spielberg." But the damage wasn't contained to Snow White, it spread like rot. The live-action remake of Tangled, which had been in pre-production, was suddenly placed on indefinite pause. No official explanation was given, but insiders pointed to the Snow White disaster as the reason. If Rapunzel's frying pan can't bash through the backlash, one exec joked darkly, no princess can. Merchandising teams froze doll shipments. Theme park designers scrapped crossover parade concepts. Licensing deals that had been greenlit months ago were suddenly under review. And worst of all, the fans weren't coming back. No new trailer, no shiny poster, no A-list cameo could reverse the damage. Nostalgia had turned on Disney. The very magic they had built their empire on was now being weaponized against them in the form of memes, reaction videos, and cutting side-by-sides. And while Zegler faced the flames online, Disney was facing something even more terrifying in the boardroom: doubt. Because now, it wasn't just about a bad movie. It was about a broken system, a studio that had stopped listening, a brand that had lost its compass. And somewhere, echoing in the background of every meeting, was Spielberg's voice. Not angry, not bitter, just disappointed. It was supposed to be a fairy tale fairy-tale comeback, a new generation's gateway to Disney magic. Instead, it became a cautionary tale in real time. March 21st, 2025, opening weekend for Snow White. Analysts were still cautiously optimistic. Despite the controversy, some predicted a $90 million domestic opening. Disney had thrown everything into the marketing push: shiny character posters, legacy montages, even last-minute edits to scrub Zegler's most damaging interviews from TV spots. But none of it worked. Reality arrived like a slap. By Friday evening, early projections were in. Domestic, $42 million. Overseas, even worse. Final global haul for opening weekend, just $183 million against a bloated budget of $260 million and a promotional campaign that felt more like triage than hype. The mood at Disney HQ was described by one insider as funeral level. PowerPoints were presented, faces were pale, and one executive allegedly muttered under their breath, "Should have listened to Spielberg." But this wasn't just a bad opening weekend, this was collateral damage. Merchandising deals were pulled, licensing partners walked, Disney store shelves remained fully stocked, untouched. Even the parks, the happiest places on Earth, started quietly removing tie-in signage and promotional setups faster than guests could take photos. Then the ripple effect hit. The tangled live-action remake, once greenlit with excitement, was shelved indefinitely. Internally, the Snow White implosion was named as the trigger. If one princess reboot could generate this much brand damage, how could they risk another? And the numbers weren't just bad, they were haunting. A $260 million production with A-list creative teams and decades of brand equity had flopped so hard, it made John Carter and Tomorrowland look like sleeper hits. It wasn't just a financial loss, it was a cultural rejection, one that shareholders would remember, one that Hollywood would dissect. By the following Monday, news outlets were running headlines like Snow White bombs at box office, Disney's biggest misfire yet, Rachel Zegler backlash cost Disney millions, was it avoidable? From fairy tale to firestorm, how one movie shook the Magic Kingdom. And here's the part that stung the most. The film hadn't even been seen by that many people. The backlash had done its damage before most audiences walked into the theater. It wasn't the movie that failed, it was the trust. Disney had bet everything on a modern, edgy reboot, and the audience responded by walking away. And in their place, a legacy shattered. A character beloved by generations turned into a lightning rod, and a reminder that once the audience loses faith, it's nearly impossible to buy it back. After the dust settled, Rachel Zegler stood in the eye of a storm she could no longer control. Once hailed as the future of Hollywood, she was now the face of a box office bomb, a cultural flashpoint, and depending on who you asked, the reason Disney's crown jewels were suddenly looking tarnished. So the redemption arc began. Her team went into overdrive. Crisis PR strategists, stylists, media consultants, it was a full-blown image rehab campaign. She appeared on Jimmy Kimmel Live, softer, more measured, speaking with what some described as remorseful poise. "I was passionate, not dismissive," she explained. Gone was the smirk. In its place, calm tones, pastel outfits, carefully curated body language. No more sound bites about stalker princes or dated fairy tales, just gentle, sanitized reflections on growth and misunderstood ambition. And yet, it didn't stick. Each time she spoke, the internet groaned, Twitter yawned, TikTok rolled its eyes. YouTube comments turned every new clip into a battlefield. The apology tour, despite its polish, felt like a movie the audience had already seen and rejected. Forbes ran a sentiment analysis chart showing the real-time impact of her appearances. Every interview correlated with a fresh spike in negative engagement. People weren't just unmoved, they were done. Even the behind-the-scenes efforts fizzled. Her team leaked photos of charity work, hushed rumors of secret meetings with descendants of the original 1937 animators, and pitched quiet rebrands through indie passion projects. She was even spotted at Sundance, her look stripped down, her tone humble, leaning into art house credibility like a life raft. None of it mattered. The court of online culture had already ruled, and their verdict was brutal. They weren't just rejecting Zegler, they were rejecting what she represented, the perception of arrogance, of tearing down beloved icons while acting above it all. Her critics didn't see a misunderstood actress. They saw someone who had mocked the magic, and now wanted forgiveness without accountability. Back inside Disney, the failure became a case study. Internal emails leaked with subject lines like brand sensitivity audit and legacy IP trust repair strategy. Completion bond insurers quietly raised their rates for films based on classic franchises. Merch teams were told to pause all retro princess reprints pending Q3 sentiment review, and one exhausted VP put it bluntly in a pitch deck margin: "We spent $260 million to teach Gen Z the word stalker. Nobody laughed. By the end, Snow White wasn't just a flop. It was a reckoning. Inside Disney headquarters, the once unshakable confidence had curdled into cautious silence. The PR team stopped pushing statements. Executives stopped booking panels. Meetings became quieter, more clinical, because no one wanted to admit the truth out loud. They'd been warned, and they didn't listen. Steven Spielberg, arguably the most celebrated director in modern film history, had called it from the beginning. He had seen the red flags, felt the tension on set, witnessed the chaos firsthand, and he'd picked up the phone not out of spite, but out of duty. He wasn't trying to destroy a career. He was trying to prevent exactly what happened. And now his name floated through the corridors of Burbank like a ghost. Spielberg warned us. It showed up in emails, in phone calls, in emergency postmortems where marketing directors and franchise managers dissected how a $260 million reboot had become a meme before it became a movie. Because this wasn't just a bad casting. It was a breakdown in judgment, a symptom of a bigger disease: arrogance, the belief that brand recognition could paper over anything, that the magic of the mouse was strong enough to survive indifference, irony, and even outright contempt. But it wasn't. Audiences made that painfully clear. They didn't want a snarky rebrand. They didn't want a hot take wrapped in CGI and feminist sound bites. They wanted heart, sincerity, a sense of wonder, the very things Disney used to bottle like lightning and had somehow let slip through their fingers. And so, the fallout continued. Rachel Zegler's next project, a rumored A24 musical drama, entered what industry insiders call development purgatory, quiet rewrites, studio re-evaluations, indie festival pivots that felt less like reinvention and more like retreat. Disney, meanwhile, retreated to safer waters. Pixar sequels, Marvel spin-offs, low-risk re-releases. Every upcoming remake underwent an audit. Scripts were scanned line by line for fan-hostile sound bites. Test groups were no longer just about pacing, they were measuring trust. And in the end, the loudest voice was the one that had gone silent. Spielberg hadn't said another word publicly. He didn't have to. His warning had become prophecy. And Hollywood, an industry that rarely learns from its own mistakes, was now holding up Snow White not as inspiration, but as a warning label. Because when one of the greatest filmmakers alive tells you a storm is coming, you don't grab a shovel to bury the message. You grab an umbrella, or better yet, you listen. Because sometimes the fairest of them all is the one who actually saw it coming.